Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to today's show of Open Dialogue. I'm Miss Marhoon, and I'm glad to be with all of you hosting this show, where we've been talking about different topics which have, for example, social or cultural significance. The topic of today is on the justice of Imam Mahdi, peace be upon him. Now, to discuss this important topic and answer some of our questions, we have today joining us Father Frank Gelli, Brother Shabbir Rizvi, as well as our resident alim Maulana Syed Muhammad Sibtain Razawi, who is on our religious advisory board. Assalamu alaikum, Syed Muhammad Rizvi, and hello to Father Frank Gelli. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So I'm going to start by asking you, Syed Muhammad Rizvi. Yes, according to Muslims, who is the Mahdi?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are near the time when Imam Mahdi Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajahu was born according to Shia Islamic teachings and traditions, and Imam Mahdi, according to both Sunni and Shia sources, is one of the descendants of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslims is that the Shia Muslims believe that he was born and he is protected by Allah, and he is not allowed to declare himself, or he's not allowed to introduce himself to the people until he's given permission to declare that he was and he is the Mahdi, that we are all waiting for his appearance. And Imam Mahdi, according to the Muslim and Shia Muslim principles, is the savior who will come near the end of the time of the world, and he will be assisted by Jesus Christ, and he will be given permission. Jesus Christ will be given permission to come and rule and lead the world together with Imam Mahdi Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajahu towards peace and justice, and both will help in establishing peace and justice in the society that had disappeared from the world. We are already witnessing the problems and injustices going on widely all over the world, and we are waiting for a savior who would establish peace and justice in the society. So it's a concept, and it's the belief that all followers of divine faith have around the world, that it would need a savior who would establish peace and justice in the world.
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to welcome Brother Shabbir Razavi, who joined us not long ago. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Shabbir.
We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. We still can't hear you. Okay, I will move on to Father Frank Gelli.
Oh, yes,
We have.
Yeah. Yes, it's
Yes,
working
we
now.
can hear you.
Okay, all right. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be here with yourself, sister, and also two of my wonderfully delightful friends whom I respect immensely. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to have a conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. So we've just started the conversation, and so I'd like to ask Brother Shabbir. So since we're talking about Imam Mehdi, I want to know, upon the return of Imam Mehdi, will Muslims of this time be among the enemies of the Mehdi?
Now, that's a profoundly interesting question. And there are two ways of answering it. There are good Muslims and bad Muslims. There are good Christians and bad Christians. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about mankind in the Holy Quran, sorry, I'm not trying to tread on your space, Razawi or Father Frank, being a non clergy myself. So I'll be only sort of delving into it from my shallow knowledge on this particular subject. What I would say is that the whole concept of mankind is very important to understand. And I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very clearly on many, many occasions talks about لَقَدْ قَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ insan, mankind. And quite often, Muslims and also some Muslim thinkers, when it refers to the Ummah, think about Muslims only. But the Ummah could perhaps be translated, from my perspective, as to mankind. And again, the Quran also very clearly refers to that Christians would be very close to the Muslims. And also at the time of the Zahur of the Imam, Jesus Christ himself will also come and pray behind Imam Mahdi salam, Jalla Ta'ala Faraj. And therefore that indicates to us that, as I said in my opening comment, that there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, there are good Christians and bad Christians. So the reality is that an interesting concept that, if you look at it, is that when Imam Khomeini put the revolution in Iran 43 years ago, he did not get rid of a Sunni leader. He did not get rid of a Christian leader. He got rid of a Shia leader. Raza Shah himself proclaimed to be a Shia and often was seen at Hussainiyas in Tehran before the revolution, just to give himself brownie points. So even Imam Khomeini shows very clearly that the revolution in Iran wasn't really to get rid of a particular person who claimed to be Shia, but to get rid of a despotic, oppressive ruler. So I think that's if you like, a litmus test that we must also think about quite often, that an oppressive individual, an oppressive government, an oppressive leader could be in the guise of a Muslim, could be in the guise of a Christian, could be in the guise of a Hindu or any other religion that you may take. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very clearly says that to him the most abhorrent individual is an oppressor. Someone may do other misdemeanors, but they may be forgiven. But to be an oppressive person is really not something that is godly. So starting from that approach, if you like, so what we see in this day and age, many leaders in our part of the world, in the Muslim majority countries, claim to be Muslims, but they are not really following Islam in any shape or form. Therefore, we can't say that because they're Muslims, therefore we need to support them. Not at all. And again, if you look at it here in UK, we've got 22 odd Muslim MPs. Our mayor is a Muslim, and many other people in politics are Muslims, but are they really following the agenda of justice? Are they really supporting the oppressed people? Are they really raising their voice against the oppressor? No, not at all. And you look at the voting track of our Muslim MPs in parliament, invariably they have voted on the side of the oppressor, whether it is on social issues or global issues. So it's quite a complex issue that we really need to understand, sister, that we can't just sort of tar or give someone credit because they're Muslim, therefore they are good people.
Yes, very true. Father Frank, I would like to ask you, so when Imam Mahdi, I mean, according to Muslims, of course, when he returns, how will Christians and people of the book react?
So let me say first that a political scientist called Schmidt said that the fundamental distinction or category in politics is the distinction between friend and enemy. Friend and enemy. Now, friends are those who are aligned with the dictates of truth, righteousness, and goodness as set out in the scriptures. From what I have learned about the figure of Imam al-Mahdi, he is a friend of Christians, in the sense in which he pursues the values, the causes which Christians also support and pursue. And of course, a key figure in Islamic eschatology, the science, the knowledge of the end times, is the figure of Nabi Isa, Prophet Jesus. Now, I should say that for a Christian, Jesus is a little bit more than a prophet. But here the point is not to talk about the differences, but to emphasize what unites us in the great battle, the great cause, I'm tempted to say a great war for the sake of justice. So in this sense, I hope that Christian will regard Imam al-Mahdi as a great friend, because he's a friend of Jesus in a time of eschatology. Now, and who is the enemy here? I've been talking about friends. Who is the enemy? Now, the enemy, of course, is, well, you can talk about the forces of the enemy, in general terms. You can talk about the economic system, which is unjust, a financial system, a system of exploitation, and political discrimination, all that. But it's actually, I believe, because one of my interests is actually fiction, and I believe it's always good to focus on an individual person. Of course, the great enemy in the Quran is Shaitan, Iblis. These are also figures of eschatology. But one figure, which subsidiary figure in the science of the end times, is Dajjal al-Masih, the false Messiah, a figure about whom I've been writing recently. I completed a book, which I'm just revising, and I hope, inshallah. So, the Dajjal is a liar, it's a deceiver, is an imposter, and he has many minions, many servants. In fact, the Sunnah speaks of minor Dajjals, as if figures who are under the orders of Dajjal. And these figures you could identify with some of the leaders of the so-called West. Checker, quite strange expression of a word West. It's a geographical expression, but depending on which part of the world you are, the West takes up a different configuration. And I hate it when this expression trotted out as it's automatically it meant righteousness and goodness. Whereas if you look at the policies of so-called Western states, they're absolutely, characterized by aggressive wars, by destabilizing foreign nations, undermining independence. It's pretty hair-raising, really. So those are the enemies which are can be seen as systems, but also as individuals. I don't want to sound too bellicose, but I would have thought that President Biden is an enemy. I would have thought that Boris Johnson is an enemy. Guys who are using the present crisis in Ukraine to divert attention to their own failures. Biden, his dismal failure in Afghanistan. Boris Johnson, his own personal shenanigans, but also, the crisis, the energy crisis now. We're all waiting for our energy bills, electricity and gas to go up 3, 4, 6 times, and many of us will not be able to afford it. Ordinary people will be in dire straits. And so, all this crisis in Ukraine is used by these minor Dajjals, Dajjalun, to divert attention from their own failures. So, to sum up, there is a distinction of friend and enemy, which is a key category of politics. Earthly politics, but also, I believe, supernatural politics. A friend, I hope for Christians, will be welcome Imam al-Mahdi as a friend and collaborate with him and his forces in the battle which we have in common about righteousness and goodness, and will unite in fighting these darker forces, minor Dajjals.
Yes, inshallah, God willing. So, I have a question for you, Syed Mohammed Rizvi. So, as we know that when the Imam Mahdi returns, he will have 313 followers. Who are these 313 followers?
Yeah, it's not 313 followers, 313 close associates, or we could say member of his parliament or member of his cabinet who would assist Imam Mahdi Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajahu to establish peace and justice in the society. We are social beings, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has created us in that way. Even if an imam or a prophet or a nabi or messenger comes to rule in the society, he would need natural resources and the help and support of the individuals who are very close and sincere and loyal to that leader. So Imam Mahdi Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajahu, who according to some narrations will have around 330 very close associates, which includes, according to the narration, around 50 of them would be women who would be assisting and helping Imam Mahdi to establish peace and justice. Otherwise, the followers will be far greater than 313 number, and the followers would be from all humanity, as Brother Shabbir was saying, that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has sent His messengers to address humanity or insan, and the human being and others, whether Muslim or non-Muslims, they are all creations of God and they cannot be ignored. And one of the blessings of reappearance of Mahdi Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajahu is and will be that with the blessings of Allah, all human beings who had so far resisted in understanding the logic and reasoning, they would certainly become open-minded and would accept the reasoning of Imam Mahdi ajallahu ta'ala farajahu, and will work together. And that's why Jesus Christ is also going to invite his followers to be united and together in establishing peace and justice in the world.
Yeah, and I had another question for you. I want to know where will the Mahdi rise from?
Well, I mean, there are many narrations, and most certainly it will be around Kaaba or Middle East, in that region where has been the abode of many prophets who have come. Although we believe that 124,000 prophets came to guide us, and it is impossible to believe that they didn't come in other parts of the world. If you look at the civilizations in Latin America and far away elsewhere, which shows a unique pattern of worship and belief. It shows that there must have had divine guidance for them, although they might have deviated from the right path in many areas. But definitely, according to the indications that we have, it will be around Middle East that Imam Mahdi ajallahu ta'ala faraju will appear, and that will be most probably Mecca or one of the holy shrines in that area.
Yes. So I'm not sure I pronounced your name properly. Is it Shabbir or Shabbir? Sorry, I didn't.
That's all right. It's not an Anglo-Saxon. It's not an Anglo-Saxon name, therefore it's difficult to pronounce. It's Shabbir, if you like.
Okay. No, I think the spelling I was giving. Yeah. So sorry if I mispronounced it. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you, Brother Shabbir, what are the signs of his arrival?
Okay, and now signs is very difficult. Of course, there are narrations, there are books that have been written, scholars have spoken about it. There are multiple signs. But one thing which has been consistently narrated and written about is that there is no one particular. There are multiple signs, there are epochs, and the key, if you like, to understand what the signs of the appearance of Imam Mahdi would be, that there would be an outcry in the world for really how mankind is being oppressed. Mankind calling out for justice. Mankind would be calling out for not just sort of just a nebulous sense, but economic justice, political justice, social justice, justice in all its multifarious dimensions. And one might sort of then start talking about what justice really means. This is not the time or the topic this evening to talk about justice in a theoretical sense, but what I want to say is in a practical sense what justice would mean. Certainly is that, if one is an employer, if we are employing someone, we should pay the right wage and the right salary. That would be justice. Justice would be that if we are landlords, we provide proper accommodation to the individuals, so that the water is not, the central heating is not working. Therefore, that is part of justice, if you like, to do things in a just manner. Similarly, on a daily basis, all of us are victims of not doing justice, and we have to consciously think, how we can operate in a just manner. So that's at a micro level, if you like. But at a macro level, one's got to see what Father Frank was earlier talking about, to see that, who the enemy is. And the enemy is not a theoretical enemy, but an enemy who inflicts pain and grief on mankind through injustice, through using, if you like, sanctions on countries to, destroy this completely. A nation that uses bombs and drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's injustice. Or American soldiers. And at this point, I just want to say that there were 7,000 Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the side of the forces in Iraq, who inflicted huge amounts of pain on the Iraqis, rape, murder, and pillage. That was injustice. Abu Ghraib was injustice. Guantanamo Bay is injustice. So we've got to look at everything that has happened in the last 70 years since the Second World War. America has been in global wars for the last 70 odd years, virtually every year. That's injustice. In our own country, we've got 4 million people going to food banks. That's injustice. In America, 40 to 50 million people don't have health care. That's injustice. So, to talk about, the signs of the appearance of Imam Mahdi would be really when there's a cry and an echo of mankind that they're suffering so much and are burdened by the oppressor in a incredibly sort of strenuous manner, and they cry out justice. That would be the sign of, if you like, the appearance of Imam Mahdi. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have sufficient knowledge, as I said in my preamble. When that sort of tipping point of injustice arrives, we just have to see and evaluate that, we've just come out of 2 years of COVID, claptrap, which has inflicted mankind in such a colossal manner. And the powers that be, whether they were pharmaceutical companies or sold out scientists who were inflicting all kinds of injustice through this particular method of lockdowns and frightening people, creating a psychology whereby we were sort of getting against each other, whether it was sort of people who took vaccine and they were saying that those people unvaccinated are enemies of mankind, if you like, or people who were wearing masks. They were telling those people who were wearing no mask that they were not doing good for the mankind. So these are all complex issues of injustice. And as I said, when the tipping point of that injustice arrives, that's when the appearance of Imam Mahdi Ajallahu Ta'ala Faraj would take place.
Yes. So does Syed Muhammad Rizvi or Father Frank, would you like to add to what Brother Shabbir has said?
Father Frank.
Sorry. Do you want to speak first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I mean, Shabbir very eloquently listed a number of examples of injustice which cry to God for vengeance or for fixing, so to speak. I would like to mention one which is particularly dear to my heart, namely the case of Palestine. I believe one of the greatest injustices which have been committed by certainly primarily by Britain, but also backed by the so-called Western countries, is what has been done to the people of Palestine, beginning with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which allowed Jews, which were not born in Palestine, which had nothing to do with Palestine, whatever historical claims and pseudo claims, to grab the land of another people. And, you know, I mean, after all, even English people would not be very happy if all of a sudden huge areas like Kent or Essex or Cornwall were settled, were taken over by Germans or by Russians. They would not be happy, would they? But for some reason, that was felt to be all right in the case of people of Palestine. So he began in a kind of insidious way. The Balfour Declaration was nuanced in a way where it wasn't quite clear what it meant. But in reality, it meant that gradually Palestinians had their best land taken over by, you know, I'm sorry to say, an alien people. And although I have great sympathy for Jewish people, for what they suffered historically, for wrongs about which the Palestinians have absolutely nothing to do. If anything, the Jews have fared much better under Islam, under the Ottoman Empire, than they did under the Inquisition in Spain and so on. But in fact, about leaving that aside, it is a fact that land was stolen and given to another people. And this injustice goes on, continues now. And we have the iconic case of Jerusalem, a holy city which is sacred to our three traditions, which has been grabbed completely by one people, the Israelis. And until recently, there was a fiction that East Jerusalem was not really part of Israel, it was just occupied. But now, you know, President Trump, a great friend of Israel, allowed Israeli to shift their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And now Israel claims the whole of Jerusalem for its possession. Now, and there are many Palestinians whose parents, you know, still have the keys of their ancestral homes in Palestine, and they keep them as a treasured possession, but they can't go back. And Arabs in Palestine have to suffer all sorts of humiliation, indignities, if they come through the Allenby Bridge, for example, and they have to go through the various Israeli sentry posts. They have to have the orifice examined by Israelis, and they have to spend you know, hours being checked out. Whereas if you're not an Arab, you can walk through almost automatically. Now that cannot, you know, that cannot be right. And I mean, the so-called occupied territories, I mean, they were conquered by the Israelis after this pseudo war, 1967, 66, if I remember correctly. I was living in Rome at the time, and I was a member of a socialist party. I remember giving speeches in party branches of the youth of a party defending the Palestinians. Although I was sufficiently bamboozled by Israeli propaganda to believe that the Israelis were defending their lives, but of course it had nothing to do with it. But it was, the whole thing was planned to grab more land from the Palestinians. And now, I mean, Israel, the settlements want to take up the whole of territories which, according to the United Nations, are not part of Israel at all. So that is a injustice, a sore international injustice, which cries to God for vengeance. there should be reparation. Palestinians should be given a chance to return to the land. Israelis should shove over and let the original owners take over. I think Israelis, the Jews, let us say Jews, should be allowed to remain in Palestine, live in peace with Palestinians, with Arabs, although some would say it's a bit theoretical. Because after you've been persecuting a people, I mean, it's not so easy to see how that can actually be fixed. I mean, if you think about what went on in Algeria, when the French, after the Algerian War of Independence, over 1 million colonists left because they knew they could not stay on in Algeria. And that, I mean, nobody knows. I mean, at the moment, it looks as if the Israelis have accomplished some of their wicked plans by getting even some Arab states to go along with them. I'm talking, of course, of the Gulf states which have formed a spurious Abraham Accord. The Prophet Ibrahim would be very pleased with that, to recognize Israel. They now have diplomatic links, even Morocco. The king of Morocco, who is supposed to be a descendant of a prophet, I think he has not done his own credentials much good by establishing links with Israel. So, you know, what is going on here? I mean, we used to speak of Christian Zionists, decry as minority of evangelical Christians to support Israel. Now they're Muslim Zionists. It's a figure of speech. They are people, they're Muslim nations who support Israel to the point of recognize having diplomatic links. So what could be more outrageous? So I keep rooting for Palestine in my modest ways. I give a little bit of money, donations, and so on. And I've been to demonstrations. I'm always very careful when I buy produce in supermarkets to make sure it's not oranges, not from Jaffa. They're not Jaffa oranges, which come from the occupied territories and so on. But of course, you have to be very careful. So I think this investment is a moral imperative. We have to do our best to make sure that the Palestinians are not forgotten. They're not sold down the river as they have been by even fellow Arabs.
And this shows the double standard that they are practicing. Like in Ukraine, everybody is making their comments in favor of Ukraine while ignoring what happened in Yemen, what happened in Palestine, what happens in Kashmir, what happens in other places of the world where all kind of atrocities are being committed, and nobody lights a candle, or nobody even considers them as human beings. So that is why is needed, a savior is needed to come and establish peace and justice in the world. Brother Shabbir I remember a few years ago, had written a very nice poem addressing all these issues. I think it's relevant if you remember parts of it, or maybe read all of it.
I mean, the funny thing is,
if you have composed something new.
I mean, the odd thing is, although I write my own work and recite my own work, but invariably I don't tend to remember it verbatim. If I knew that I was going to recite it, I would have perhaps some other time. What I would like to say, as a follow-up of what Father Frank was saying and Molana Razawi, that, you know, when I was talking about earlier, if you look at Venezuela, for instance, Venezuela is, I think, it's a Catholic country, isn't it, Father Frank?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes, it is.
So it's part of the Christendom, if you like. And if you look at most of the countries in South America and Central America and the Caribbean, they are either Protestants or Catholics. But, the big brother in North America called USA has inflicted atrocities on these nations, starting from Mexico going down to Chile. I remember some years ago, way back in 1971, when a democratically elected leader in Chile called Allende, Dr. Allende, was elected. And at that time, America didn't want Allende to be in power because he was demanding rights for his nations. And he was murdered, his family were assassinated, and they put in Pinochet in power, who was there for 25 years, killed 250,000 Christians. Same thing happened in many South American countries. So you've got to look at it that the ex-colonial powers, i.e., Britain, France, and most of the other European countries, whether it's a tiny little country like Portugal and Belgium, or Spain or Italy, they all had empires all over the world. Even a pathetic little country I call Netherlands had huge empires all over the world in the Far East, and they inflicted murder and mayhem on the original people there. And subsequently, after that, America has been killing randomly in Central and South America so-called Christian brothers. So the evil forces don't really have any religion. The only religion they have is power, money, and to grab whatever they can for a small elite. And here I just like to sort of put a word. We describe so-called friends of Putin as oligarchs, but we have oligarchs in our country, and they're called entrepreneurs. They're called, rich and wealthy, clever, smart people like Bezos or Musk. Or any other sort of Zuckerberg or any other. They are as much oligarchs, if you like, because the elites in the West control the political dialogue, political conversation, the narrative which is put forward. And during the crisis of Ukraine, we've seen that, those people who are religiously inclined, we always say that truth will shine and truth will always come out right. But the way the truth is being manipulated is that people get thoroughly confused as to what is truthful and what is not. Therefore, we have to be extra careful into not sort of accepting the narrative which is put forward by the evil forces, which have been shown to be liars. And, as Mr. Pompeo, the former secretary, the foreign minister of USA, put it very admirably: we lie, we cheat, and we steal. So at the end of the day, when a foreign secretary of a nation says that we lie, we cheat, and we steal, so that should be our test, that on any issue, whether it is issue of COVID, Ukraine, West Asia, Israel, any country, China, if it's coming from London, Washington, or Paris, is not truthful. That should be our litmus test when their own leaders say that we lie, we cheat, and we steal.
Yes. So we're coming to the end of time. But yeah, before we wrap up, I have one last question for any of you, or all of you to answer. So what might Imam Mehdi's relationship be with the present day resistance axis led by Iran and Ayatollah Khamenei against imperialism be?
Father Frank Gelli.
Well, I do support the Islamic Republic of Iran. I've been on conferences in Iran twice, and I've actually one was about Imam al-Mahdi, and I gave a paper there. And I think Iran, the Islamic Republic, is a very crucial bulwark against these forces of disorder, confusion, and immorality, which are rising up in the world, which want to subvert everywhere. Iran is a very precious element in opposing the forces of darkness. The Iranian Islamic Revolution was turned by a great, great or not so great French theorist called Michel Foucault, a revolution against history. And by that he meant that all previous European revolutions, or European and American, all were against revelation, against revealed religion. Whereas the Iranian revolution was the only one which placed religion, revelation, God at the center of the agenda. And that is an immensely valuable and important contribution which the Islamic Republic of Iran has made to our common battle. So, and it's significant that these unjust forces are always trying to target Iran, they try several times to destroy it. And we know how Mossad, the Israeli secret services, have murdered Iranian scientists because they don't want Iran to acquire nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, because the supreme leader of Iran has declared that nuclear weapons are actually contrary to Islam. The UN, whereas it's a peaceful use which Iran wants to acquire. And why should it not? Why should it not? Why is it that only countries which are kissing, I don't want to use bad language, kissing the posterior, the behind of the Western Molochs, the Western Dajjals, have a right to have access to energy and nuclear energy and so on. So I certainly want to say, and also finally, I had the pleasure once in Tehran of hugging one of my favorite Iranian politicians, President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. I know he's no longer president, but I was quite fond of him because he was a great maverick, and I do like maverick. I do like people who rock the boat. And I am one who likes to rock the boat in the church a lot. So God willing, Iran would be preserved for all these demonic attempts to destabilize and destroy it, and that Imam al-Mahdi will come back and make sure and defend the Islamic Republic. But also, actually, one final point. I think, because the program is devoted to Imam al-Mahdi. And of course, in Christianity, we have the belief in the second coming of Jesus, return of Jesus. But it's very important to emphasize, because we have these beliefs about the end of time, that does not free us from fighting the battle here and now. Because, otherwise it will be a form of alienation. Oh, yes, it will be in due course of the end of that. No. The battle goes on here and now. It's a moral imperative, moral, spiritual imperative. We fight the battle against the forces of darkness here and now.
Yes, very, very good point. Would Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi or Brother Shabbir, would you like to add to what Father Frank has said?
If I may, a few words with your permission, Maulana. And
Go ahead.
Look, Father Frank has quite eloquently put in the whole idea of the purpose of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And Imam Khomeini himself, in his wonderful sort of short phrases, said that the revolution in Iran was an Islamic revolution, and it wasn't a revolution for watermelons. what he was trying to say, that it wasn't a revolution based just on materialism, consumerism, or to provide bread and butter for everyone. Of course, that is important because people have to survive and they need to be provided with sustenance and sustainable sustenance. But the key area, the key aspect of the Islamic revolution was really what I have often said, is to bring piety into politics. Because as we know, politics or political craft, which is practiced by many politicians all over the world, irrespective of Western or Eastern or Southern politicians, is based on corruption, on oppressing their own people. So piety, bringing piety into politics, is not having a rosary in your hand or having a mark on your forehead to show that you're pious, but really to be, doing things for the benefit of mankind. And that's what the Islamic revolution was. And once again, Imam Khomeini also clearly said that this revolution is here to support the oppressed people of the world. So that means not just within Iran or West Asia, but globally, everywhere where there is oppression taking place. Islam and the Islamic revolution supports that. That's the reason why from day one, it's the Islamic revolution or the Islamic Republic sort of cut off its relationship from the apartheid regime in South Africa, cut off relationship from the Zionist regime in Tel Aviv, and gave the Zionist embassy to the Palestinians in Tehran. So consistently over the last 43 years, Islamic Republic of Iran has shown that it will stand on the side of the oppressed and against the oppressor. That's the reason why it has been the most sanctioned country, if you like, up until Russia has become the most sanctioned country. But certainly prior to that, Iran was the most sanctioned country because it wants to feed, to really bat for, to use a cricketing metaphor, to bat for the oppressed people all the time and always.
Thank you very much. And we've come to the end of the show now. Thank you to our respected guests, Father Frank Gelli, Brother Shabbir Rizvi, and also to our in-house Maulana Syed Muhammad Razawi, as well as to all our viewers for joining us.